So the agenda for this evening is to have a quick gallop through a recap on East West Rail project and what they've done so far in this area, their plans in this area. It'll then go on to look at alternative route alignments that Cambridge Approaches have developed and what the parish councils have commented and voted on. And then William will take over and look at the recent work that Cambridge Approaches have done, and then we'll open the floor to questions and answers. Next slide, please. Okay, East West Rail is a railway that's planned between Oxford and Cambridge, and then eastwards to the ports, Felixstowe in particular. It's divided into three sections: the western section, which is between Oxford and Bedford, the central section between Bedford and Cambridge, and the eastern section between Cambridge and the ports. Some of the route has already been built and opened. That is between Oxford and Bicester, and there's enabling works on some other parts of the western route, western section. East West Rail carried out a public consultation on the central section early last year. Not a great deal of people attended. And about a year later, in January this year, East West Rail selected option E corridor out of 5 alternatives. They said that option E was selected on the basis of best value for the taxpayer, the most popular with the respondees to comments, and gave the best opportunities for the environment, whatever that means. And I'll tell you what, I'll show you now what option E corridor is. If we go briefly to the next slide. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen, Bedford, and then going eastwards, you can see St Neots, or a station between St Neots and Sandy, and then on to Camborne, a station planned south of Camborne. And the area that we're particularly concerned about is the area east of Toft and towards Cambridge south. I should say at this stage that there was no consultation, there has been no consultation on alternative routes into Cambridge. It took us a fait accompli, an approach into Cambridge South only, and not one into Cambridge North or any other option. At the moment, East West Rail are preparing route alignments, possible route alignments within the option E area. So they're looking at possible routes, and they've kept them a closely guarded secret up to now. Cambridge Approaches, as I'll go on in a minute to explain, have proposed, have suggested possible routes, but we really don't know whether they're going to be the ones that East West Rail propose. The next public consultation is early next year, so maybe in late January, but they haven't given a date yet. Construction is due to start in 2025. Cambed Railroad have proposed that it's another campaign group that's been active for a few years now, and they proposed a route into North Cambridge, well to the north of the option E area that you can see in the bottom part of the screen. And their route goes from a station to the north of Camborne, following the northern side of the A428 for a few miles before it veers up northwards towards Northstowe, and then approaching Cambridge via Cambridge North Station. They added a chord across part of a bottom corner of Coldham's Common to enable freight to travel on eastwards. So Cambridge Approaches is founded a few months ago. It feels like a lot longer than that. The purpose was to help parish councils choose the least worst rail alignment for the area, so that we could go back as a collective voice to East West Rail and try to convince them of the merits of that. And to that end, we held a series of meetings with representatives from 12 parish councils in the Option E area to the east of Toft. And we prepared alternative routes, we prepared impact assessments, we discussed these routes in detail, and at the end of the process, the representatives from the parishes provided written comments and voted on the alternatives. This is a map of the Option E area, which is shown in red. And you can see basically that there is one route to the north, the sub-option, one route through the middle, and 3 routes to the south. I won't go into those in much detail. Excuse me. They are on our website if you haven't seen them already. During this process, we also developed a further route from, instead of Camborne South Station, which is the Option E alternative proposal, we went from a station to the north of Camborne. And next slide, please. Which followed Campbell Railroad's alignment for a few miles to the east of Hardwick before it dives down towards the Barton Rifle Range and towards Hawkeston, and then across through Great Shelford to join the main line into Cambridge South. The outcome from the meetings was that most of the parishes voted, and all but one commented. The main finding was that there were problems with all the Option E alternatives. There was no good one at all. The best of the bad lot, if you like, was Option 1A, which is one to the north. And that had most support of the voting parishes in Option E. But the clear winner by a great margin was Option 6, the last one from Camborne North and across towards Barton Rifle Range. Next slide, please. The impacts of all the routes, including Option 6, the main impact is that Great Shelford is impacted severely by all the alternatives. And no parish escapes totally from impacts apart from South Trumpington. Alternative 6A has impacts on far fewer properties than the best of the Option 6 routes. And in this, there were no properties within 250 metres of the proposed track in South Trumpington, Grantchester, Hawkeston, Compton, and Barton. Next slide, please. So, summary of the comments that were made. Everyone said that there was no benefit to the Option E area of a rail going through it. There's great concern about the proximity of villages to the track in terms of housing, noise and air pollution. And there was great concern about potential cutting of roads and public right-of-ways, the impacts on the environment and farmland. Discussions were also held on the impact of villages compared to the impact on the environment and how to balance those. And there was some discussion on the impact of MRAO in choice of route. MRAO, the radio telescopes, is right bang in the middle of option E and determines the route alignments to a great extent. There was some desire amongst parishes to ask MRAO to move their active telescopes, they're not all active, to less sensitive areas of the site. And we have had discussions with MRAO about that. Okay, I'll now hand over to William, who will talk about the recent activities of Cambridge Approaches.
Okay, thank you, David. My name is William Harold. I'm a neighbour of David's in Hastingfield. The activities that David's been talking about kind of came to a head on the 8th of October, where we did a presentation of the voting results to East West Rail, Will Gallagher and Ian Parker, and Anthony Brown, our local MP, and members of South Cambridge District Council. Since then, we've been researching other aspects of the issue, and I kind of want to report on some of those here, and also some of our latest activities and communication with various stakeholders. The other thing I'd like to say is that we did invite Ian Parker and Will Gallagher from East West Rail to come and join us here this evening, but they were too busy to join us. So first thing I'd like to talk about is some of the history of East West Rail, in particular why the East West Rail might be a good idea. So the discussions about it, as we understand it, have been going on since the mid-90s. Talking to Edward Lee in Smarter Transport, which is a group in Cambridge, who've been around for a while, it seems that initially it was intended as a freight line, so connecting Felixstowe to the Midlands. Then it kind of morphed into a fast passenger link as part of the Oxford, Cambridge, Milton Keynes ARC initiative. So this is fast transport from Cambridge to Oxford, really targeting engineers and scientists that want to live in Cambridge and commute to Oxford. I'm an engineer. I've lived around the Cambridge area since the 1980s. I think I've been to Oxford 3 times. But anyway, maybe there's a market for people that want to commute, but I don't think that East West Rail have really demonstrated that so far in their documentation. Another aspect that was added to the case for this was to support housing development. So you'd be aware that land around stations, agricultural land, might be have a value of maybe £25,000 per hectare, with planning permission, which would need to have infrastructure, transport infrastructure to support it. Then it could be £5 million per hectare. So there's a huge uplift in land values, and there's an opportunity in that to provide revenue through taxation to the government to support this this business case. I think the other thing to say about it is that in one of the foundational documents of the Oxford Cambridge ARC, which is the National Infrastructure Commission report, they do provide evidence that there's strong commuter demand into Oxford, Cambridge and Milton Keynes. There's much less evidence that there's kind of demand to go long distances all the way from Oxford to Cambridge, at least in terms of what we've seen. So there's a sort of a mystery there. I think the other thing to say about this is that the total cost of the Bedford to Cambridge central section at the time of the last public consultation was 1.9 billion pounds for option A. They selected option E, as David said, but in the year between the consultation and the selection of option E, the price went up to 5.6 billion, so 3 times. So we think that means there should be a bit of a fundamental review of the business case, but no sign of that so far. So talking about freight, so this is a map from National Rail with some annotations from Steve Edmondson, who's in Cambridge Approaches and on the call this evening. So you can see the Felixstowe port on the right-hand side. You can see some existing lines, freight lines around North London and up through Ely to get to points where you can take the containers off the rail and maybe into a distribution centre or onto a lorry. And from a climate change point of view, this is an excellent thing to move traffic off the road onto the rail. And so what we've done is we've drawn in to this map, in blue here, the East-West Rail route. So you can see that there's another route to the Midlands from Felixstowe. So if you talk to the East-West Rail Company about freight, then they kind of shrug their shoulders and say, well, actually, we're building the central section and we want to operate a passenger service. I think freight is a bit of an annoyance to them, actually. If you talk to the East-West Rail Consortium, which is the various stakeholders in that, but there are a lot of county councils, including, say, Suffolk County Council, then they have just tendered for a consultant to develop a business case for the eastern section of the East-West Railway, so from Cambridge to Ipswich and Norwich. And in the tender for that, which is available on the internet, they say that East-West Rail presents a huge opportunity to become a secondary freight route, enabling more services to bypass the congested London routes currently used to get to the southwest, Midlands and the north. The other thing they say is there's an opportunity to ship, let's say, raw materials for the development of Sizewell C, the new power station that's been planned on the East Coast. So I wanted to just show you what these sort of freight trains look like as they come out of Felixstowe. So if the technology works, I'm just going to show you a video. So here's a Freightliner train that can be up to half a mile long. Thanks to Steve Edmondson again for finding this. This is actually on a bit of an embankment, and you'll see as the video goes on that it goes over a bridge. So actually this is Little Diana. This may be what it looks like as it crosses the Cam in the option E area. So I'll just play that for a minute or so. So it looks like this one's got some more bulk material in it. Okay, so you just got to imagine that maybe south of Harston, in a cutting south of Haslingfield, perhaps going across the road between Halton and Haslingfield, or just north of the Eversdens. There are, I think, 47 freight trains leaving Felixstowe every day, and it's growing. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's that sort of order. Both in and out. Yeah. So anyway, that's the freight story. The thing to understand about it is it's not the East West Rail Company that will be operating those. There will be existing freight rail operators. But the question we had to ask East West Rail is the central section going to be freight capable? And so anyway, we'll come to that in a minute. Moving on. So East West Rail have not told us where they are intending to put the so-called route alignments in the Option E area. And that's kind of understandable, because it's a bit like a doctor thinking through possible diagnoses at the bottom of your bed. You don't want to hear it, you want to hear the final answer. But Pilgrim Bayat, who's I believe on the call, set up this map for us, which has now been viewed, looks like 13,000 times. And what it shows is people reporting survey requests for farmland and
that's both of them. Two for me there.
Back gardens and so on. And there's a preponderance of reports, I would say, on the southern boundary of the Option E area. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to go there. It just means that that's what's been reported. But it's certainly, they are looking at a route down the southern boundary. Most of these are environmental survey requests, but we have seen some activity on the road between Halton and Haslingfield that is more than that. So we've seen reports of ground penetrating radar just to see what the hillside is made of. So anyway, so there's a kind of thorough look there. Not all of the survey requests we've had are consistent with that route. So you can see there's some up here and north of Hawkston. And we think this one here on Mary's Farm is probably more about environmental stuff than any intention to put the route there. Of course, this is close to the Eversden Woods, which we'll come on to in a minute. So one question that arises is, if you receive a request for an environmental survey, then what should you say? Should you say yes or not? And I think they were offering about £500 or so, and I think it's gone up recently from reports. So I guess one's initial thought is that if you're not in favour of the railway, then saying no to a survey request feels like the right thing to do. The other sort of argument here is that if East West Rail are trying to do environmental surveys and trying to find out what the ecological issues are and constraints are, then we kind of want to let them do that. So that's an argument for saying yes. One of the other problems here is that people that have said yes to surveys and have asked for the survey reports have not yet received them. So there's a question of transparency on the reports. So we were thinking there's an opportunity here for some collective bargaining about, yes, if we say yes to these surveys, then we want some guarantee of transparency. And I know that Paul Tebbett's put in a question which we should come back to in the Q&A about that. And we also have a potential meeting that's being set up in next week in the Eversdens to talk about this further. So I'll move on from that for now, and maybe we can come back to that in a bit later on. So in terms of why we should have a North Cambourne option, so that David referred to, Of course, you know, one of the reasons why it was popular with the parishes in the voting was that it's actually largely not in our backyard. That's kind of slightly flawed argument for moving the railway, because of course if you just don't have it in your backyard, then it moves into somebody else's backyard. So better arguments are to do with you know, it being a better solution overall. South Cambs, we understand, has an intention in its local plan to preserve the character of the villages around South Cambridgeshire and our villages in the Option E area. A North Cambourne station, which our option 6 would support, is better for the intended development of Cambourne. Cambourne is going to develop hugely over the next period, so it's going to be much, much bigger, and it's going to develop north of the A428 more than south. So a Cambourne North station, we think, is more consistent with that. In terms of less disruption to the environment, having what they call a multimodal corridor, where you've got road and rail side by side, is a good thing. And there's an opportunity to do that between the Black Cat roundabout all the way to Cambridge. Also an opportunity to have a multimodal transport hub, perhaps near the Caxton Gibbet roundabout. So lots of good features of a Cambourne North station, whether the route ends up going still to Cambridge South or as CDRR proposed into Cambridge North. You'll see on our website some information about how precious the farmland is around here for wheat production and how much damage a railway line going through it produces in terms of cutting up fields and vermin on the line and so on. So moving the railway off the farmland is a very good thing. A few more reasons in later slides. Just to summarise where people are on this Cambourne North option. So as we mentioned, the Cambridge Approaches Oversight Group of 12 parishes voted in favour of that by some margin. Our local MP has supported that. He's got councillors, parish councillors, district councillors, county councillors together with East West Rail to talk about it, and he's done press release saying that he supports the Cambourne North option, so very much in favour. We've spoken to Mayor James Palmer, who has told us that he's in favour of a Cambourne North option. Don't think he's gone to a press release on that yet. Members of South Cambs District Council, I know we have Ian Solomon on the call this evening, is in favour of that, and other members, and also, of course, CDRR. So lots of support for a Cambourne North station. So this is a rather busy map of, it's on the Greater Cambridge Planning Portal, but it shows the area again, and it shows potential areas for new residential development in red. So if you can see here, the junction between the 428 and the 1198, and all of this area to the north, all the way up to Papworth and Ellsworth, is potentially in play for quite large numbers of new houses. And there's also some stuff in play south. So these are kind of, as I understand it, they are offered sites. The purple stuff is non-residential, which is again for development, but for other purposes. Very little in the Option E area. And remember that the business case for the East West Rail depends on supporting housing development. So it makes a lot of sense to follow the Cambed Railroad type proposal because it supports more housing development. So as I said, that's a bit of a busy slide. So I've kind of done a diagrammatic version of it here. So you can see the A428 dual carriageway. This is the Caxton Gibbet. They're going to extend the dual carriageway all the way to the Black Cat roundabout. So what could happen is that you have, this is north of the East-West Rail as Option E area, but you could have a railway that is alongside that A428. If you did that and looking at where the development around Camborne is going to be, then a travel hub here, so north of the A428, makes a lot of sense. People could change between road and rail and whatever other modes of transport there are, metros and so on. Where East West Rail are currently verbally proposing it is down here, just north of Caxton, and then of course on the route down to our area, the Eversdens, etc. So there's 4,300 houses in Camborne at the moment. South Cambs, in their current local plan, need to build another 31,000. With East West Rail, apparently they need to build something like another 19,000. And there's also a requirement for a 15,000 house garden town somewhere. So there's a lot of houses, and many of them are going to come around this Camborne area. So really, it's better if the whatever infrastructure there is supports that as much as possible. So it's a compelling argument for Camborne North. Completely different topic here. So this fellow here on the left is a very rare bat. So this is a Barbastelle bat. We are one of the few places in the country that has a special area of conservation for Barbastelle bats. So what the map is showing is roosts, flight lines, and foraging. So this is based on a survey that was done by the Cambridge Bat Group in 2002 of the area that showed where the roosts are, and they're broadly in the Wimpole Woods and the Eversden Woods. There are flight lines all over Little Eversden, all over Harleton, on the ridge up on the Mare Way behind Haslingfield. There's foraging areas in Grantchester. In fact, wherever there's a wood in this area, then there's foraging. There are flight lines along the old Varsity line as well. So the question arises as to what is it about these bats that are protected, and is it just the roosts, or is it also the flight lines and foraging areas? So we are still researching this. There's Article 6 of the Habitats Directive that is the relevant legislation that was started out as European law, but of course it was long ago adopted as UK law, and that protects rare bats, rare species, and their habitats. So our understanding is the intention of this special area of conservation and the area around it is to protect not only the roosts, but also the flight lines and foraging areas. So if you have a project that goes through this area, then there's a big issue with the legislation. So, and this has come up in HS2, so one of the arguments for making sure that East West Rail actually do find out about the bats and other ecological issues is to support the case that they actually do move out of this optioning area.
A drink. Do you want one?
Same sort of stuff here in words. So the East West Rail policy is that they have developed route options with environmental considerations at the forefront, which is very, very noble. They've actually options A through to E, which is what were in the previous consultation, all impact the Wimpole Special Area of Conservation. So, whichever one you pick, you were going to hit a problem with the bats. The Habitats Directive says that competent national authorities shall agree to the plan or project only after having ascertained that it will not adversely affect the integrity of the site concerned, if appropriate, having obtained the opinion of the general public. They haven't looked at any options that are, that don't affect this SAC, and so that's a problem. As touched on earlier, we haven't seen any environmental survey reports. We have put in an FOI request to see them. The response has come back saying it's not in the public interest for people to see them. we actually have cases also of landowners who were promised that they would see their survey report, and the survey's done. They asked for it, and they say, "Oh yes, it's coming. We haven't kind of finished our QA on it yet, but to our knowledge, nobody's actually seen their survey report." So we pay for this through taxes. It's your land, but you don't get to see the results. We have raised this with East West Rail, and they are thinking about it. So we have a kind of long series of questions outstanding with in our dialogue with East West Rail, and they have been very good at answering the questions. It takes them kind of, I guess, a few weeks to come back. I guess the problem is they don't actually always put a lot of information in the answers. We had a batch of questions that we had answers to yesterday. And so I wanted to just highlight some of them. So one of the long-running issues that came out of the oversight group discussions is what their policy was on restoring roads and rights of way cut by the railway. So what we've heard from Ian Parker and Will Gallagher verbally is very reassuring in that they say, unless it's practically impossible, they will restore access. In terms of putting that in writing, then they deleted it from a previous answer that we noted verbally and put to them. This time they're saying that it will be decided on an individual basis. So for every road or right of way that is cut, they will decide on an individual basis. So there's no kind of guarantee of anything in that statement, but that's what came through yesterday. They've also said that, well, they'll probably consult on route alignments north of Cambourne in the consultation coming out in January. Formally, they're saying maybe. So I guess they don't want to commit to something before the minister's signed off the next consultation. So in a way, that's fair enough. Key question is, will the central section be freight capable? And the answer to that is yes, it will be. So all that needs to happen for freight to come through is it needs to fit in the timetable and for freight operators to be approved. East West Rail don't have to do any more as a company. So, as you lie awake waiting for listening to these freight trains come past your back garden, they'll still wake you up even if they're not East West Rail Company trains. Can you rule out freight trains at night? So this came out of a statement from Ian Parker, who's their kind of, I would say, operations director, about how fast passenger trains and slow freight trains go at different speeds and don't easily mix in the timetable. And so we were thinking, well, probably there's a good opportunity then for them to go at night because that won't disturb the passenger trains. So the answer to that one was, well, we're still studying that one, which is a good stop response that we get if they can't think of a good answer or a reassuring answer at the moment, but they're still studying that one. They have expressed concerns about the difficulties of multimodal corridors, of running the road and the railway side by side. And they're talking about how modern dual carriageways tend to snake left and right a little bit, and it's awfully hilly on the A428, and there might be gaps between the road and the railway. And we've pointed out to them that there are, loads of examples of people successfully doing this. We've consulted several rail experts who say there's no problem. So we asked them, is this a blocker? So they've said, well, not necessarily. So I think they are seriously looking at going along the A428. Who's going to operate the freight? As we've said, they've said rail freight operators. There's several already around on other rail lines. Last question we asked them was about the level of, there's a thing called a strategic environmental assessment that the environmental experts that we've been talking to say that might have been done already on the auctionee area. So we asked them, have you done one of these? And they've said no, they don't need to. And I think the reason why they've said that is because it's a nationally significant infrastructure project. So some of these things can be waived. So we are talking to an environmental lawyer on Monday to get more of the gen on this. But anyway, so they haven't done that. Moving on, current objectives from Cambridge Approaches. So we had been leading up to this vote about the route options, but since then we've kind of reviewed our objectives. So we are continuing to research and communicate arguments for the Camborne North route, whether that's going into North Cambridge a la CBRR or still going into Cambridge South. We are encouraging public objection to option E. We are asking questions about the business case for East West Rail. Remember, it's gone up, the costs have gone up by a factor of 3. We are working with several like-minded stakeholders. In the worst case scenario, where it does come through option E, and certainly in a damaging way, and the only sanction we've really got is a judicial review. We're looking for what the grounds for that might be. If it comes to that, we're going to need to raise tens of thousands of pounds to fight the case. But like I say, we're not at that stage yet. So we'll obviously review our objectives when the next consultation comes out. I think this is the final slide I've got before we get to the Q&A. So a question that a lot of people ask us is, well, what can I do? You can write to the East West Rail Company expressing your opinions, how well consulted you feel or not. You can write to local and national politicians. If you look on our website, cambridgeapproaches.org, you can see addresses of people that might be worth writing to, and also some suggestions about what you might like to write about. We've had some complaints from some local politicians that all they spend their time doing is answering letters from people in Haslingfield. So I think there's a challenge for some of the other villages to not be outdone by Haslingfield. You can sponsor a sign. There's a sign there giving advice to the East West Rail planners about where they should put their railway. You can subscribe to the website. You can maybe comment on some of the posts, or if you've got something you want to write, just propose a post. More the merrier. You can get involved in the Cambridge Approaches group. It's a little bit all-consuming at the moment, but there's a kind of variety of different ways in which you can get involved. You can anytime you can email us to info@cambridgeapproaches.org. Yeah, thanks very much for listening to that. Let's move back to David now for some questions and answers.
David, William, thank you very, very much for that enormously helpful summary of where we've got to. As a resident of the Everstons, which on any view seems extremely likely to be impacted by almost all of the plausible route options within the option E area, I'd just like to raise a question for other parishes really about strategy. It strikes me, as the CAG's discussions have suggested, that none of the option E possibilities are really satisfactory for the area as a whole. And I would hate for us to end up as a divided body of parishes arguing about a particular alignment within that area. Now, of course, the end game might well be that that's where the route is, but until we get to the point of knowing for sure where the corridor or the route alignment's going to be, is there anything that we collectively can do to force the thinking in a different direction, to force a pause. That you know, we know that CBR have had some very well thought through proposals in the past for a northern approach, and they present what appears to be a compelling set of arguments. There are also arguments that, to my knowledge, haven't been compellingly refuted, and yet they are a set of proposals on which none of us have ever had the opportunity to be consulted. We have never been consulted on any route that would run into northern Cambridge. And that is, I think, frustrating for many of us. So I suppose that the general question that I'd throw to the parishes represented here, but also the other parishes represented in the Option-E corridor, is whether we should think about plan A, plan B, plan C strategies, and think about whether there is something that we can do in the shorter term, at least, to try and force more clearly and squarely that wider range of options back on the agenda before it really does seem to be too late. So, you know, reminding people of what that case is for a different approach.
So your question, Steve, is to the other parishes in the area. And
so it is, but it's also, I mean, also,
meeting.
I suppose I'd be interested in understanding what you know, what the approaches group's perspective might be on that. I mean, it's I know that from my own community, that is an approach that, you know, I think is the only one that seems like it would deliver an outcome that is at all appealing. I can see that the stakes for some other parishes might not be quite so acute, because there are possibilities right now that the alignment doesn't affect them so heavily. But in arguing against where we are now, it does seem to me that the CBR argument is compelling, which is the argument that says if we're to win this argument, we need a better route. And within the Option-E area, you know, the better route might look like pushing it slightly outside the Option-E area to Route 6. But if that's not on the cards, or if we're left, where are we left? So should we be thinking more boldly, quickly, or is that something is that a battle that's been lost?
If I may, I think that it's something that we are, as you know, Stephen's kind of discussing in Cambridge approaches. I'm not sure that we have quite reached a coherent conclusion yet, but it's something along the lines of pause and look more widely. And reasons for pauses might be that the interaction between the local plan for housing and this critical piece of infrastructure is clearly not synchronized. There wasn't good enough consultation for a variety of reasons. You know, so many people have told us that the Cambridge Approaches leaflet was the first they heard of this, and various arguments like that says maybe we should be petitioning for a pause and look at more options. But like I say, you know, it's a work in progress in terms of our thinking.
And also the tactics on how to do that in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
East West Rail are only going to do that sort of about turn if they're, in my view, forced to by government, or there's a commercial incentive for them to do it. Otherwise, they'll just carry on and try and get the job done as quickly as they can.
So I suppose just that if I can have just a follow on question, it's whether there are any kind of key sets of issue or theme that that collectively we could emphasize in a very public way, maybe by the appropriate use of the press, or appropriate approaches to that would bring those issues that we really think are important, like the environmental dimension, like the diesel dimension, and so on, bring them to the fore, so that they cannot be ignored by EWR, because they are brought to the attention of the minister in a way that they cannot publicly ignore. So I'm not somebody in communications or PR. I'm not somebody in journalism, but I just wonder whether, with a bit of advice, we might be able to leverage some of that appropriately.
It's got to be done through public awareness and getting the public onto our side, and that is through the media generally, through persuasion of local politicians, trying to get them onto our side, and force East West Rail at high level within the government to change their mind. But as I say, that our Cambridge approach is thinking on the tactics to best implement that is work in progress. But as William said before, that anyone is very welcome to approach us and put their sixpenneth worth in, and potentially sit on a working group. So we'd welcome other people's opinion about how best to do this.
So if there's any lawyers out there, or people that are good with the press, that want to help Cambridge Approaches, then that would be a great fit. David, I think we need to move on because we've got quite a few questions.
Yep. Okay, the next one on the list is Pilgrim Beard.
Hi, it's actually Sarah Beard masquerading as her husband this evening.
Oh, right. Okay.
Thanks very much for the presentation. It's really helpful and informative. I had one kind of strategic thought, which is I'm imagining the strategy, just thinking about the previous questioner, is about trying to get away from option E, and then also in parallel trying to pursue ideas that mitigate whatever the eventual route is if we find ourselves faced with not being able to get away from option E. And I think the mitigation thing led to a few questions for us. So one of which is, and apologies if I've missed this, is how on earth are there diesel lines still being put in this day and age? And I don't know if there's been any attention to that. The second question I had is about level crossings, given that this route looks like it may well cross the A10, and there's been a lot of debate about trying to stop any new level crossings being built. And the third question I had is, could we get the BAT people to redo their survey? Because I'm imagining that's quite old now in the views of East West Rail. So I'll stop there.
In terms of diesels and versus electric, there was a question in the House of Lords a few months ago about whether they were going to go for diesel or not. And they said that, yes, they were, but they were still considering it. It was still under review. They've since that statement gone out to obtain what we understand are second-hand diesel units. So I think they're going for that. However, and I think that was done on the basis of capital cost reduction. Electrification is very expensive, but they do have to meet the carbon targets. Their thinking might be, and I don't know whether it is that they might run diesels for a few years until their life expired, and then go to a developing technology using batteries. So they wouldn't need the overhead gantries of current electrification routes. I don't know whether that's their strategy or not, but it might be. But where Cambridge Approaches is dead against diesels from the outset. In terms of your level crossings, level crossings wouldn't be allowed to be built by the Office of the Rail Regulator, Rail and Road Regulator, unless there were absolutely no alternative. So I don't think there's any chance of there being level crossings. So they either go over the road or under the road. That's why we are concerned about cutting off roads. The capital cost of going over or under a road is very large. And the embankments, if it were going over the road, the embankments leading up to it, or internal going under it, the cuttings going under it, very extensive and very expensive. So your third one about bats and whether we should try and get the Cambridge Bat Group to do further surveys. I don't know whether you've got a more recent view on that, William.
Yeah, I think it links in actually a few things. So we had a question from Paul Tebbit earlier on about, so if we do get together and accept some of these survey requests, then Paul's suggestion was that the money that East West Rail pay for that could be pooled to fund a new bat survey that we actually definitely got to see the output of. So I thought that was an interesting suggestion. Stephen Watterson, are you still on for getting a group of, I don't know what we call them, landowners together to discuss tactics on these surveys, and maybe we could throw that into the mix?
So that was the plan to organise a meeting as soon as possible. In order not to have a proliferation of messages about meetings, I've not yet contacted people about that meeting, but it's something I plan to email people about over the weekend, so that the plan would be trying to hold a meeting like that next week, an appropriate day. Yeah.
Would that be an Everston meeting, or would it be?
I mean, that was the initial plan. I mean, obviously, it's easier for me to contact people in the Everstons. I have no way of reaching people that are not short of, I suppose, advertising that meeting, maybe through the CAG.
It would be easy enough for me to put an advert on the website, as I've done for this meeting. So if you just pick a time and tell me to do it, I can put that on for you, and then people on this call that are interested in tactics on surveys could join, because I suspect the 4 villages on this call tonight probably have very similar issues.
Yeah, I mean, so I can certainly do that. And can I assume that the issue of surveys is something that will be raised with the lawyer on Monday? Because I think we probably need to have a perspective on that.
Yeah, we understand you'll say do it. My worry is transparency. But we will talk about that. Yeah. Okay, sounds like a plan.
Okay, I think the next one is Ellie Crow.
Hi there. There are 2 things that I was hoping to bring up. I brought them up with Anthony Brown, and I spoke to somebody from his office, but I've yet to have a formal response. The 2 things that I talked to them about, one was listed buildings. So we live in a listed building from the 1700s, and we're in danger of the freight line running right in front of the house, basically. And we're an old timber frame building. It wobbles about all over the place. There's all sorts of lovely cracks and that's just from the road and the farm traffic and what have you. And my concern is, you know, I have no background in engineering or anything like that, but what happens to this lovely old building with the, you know, the potential of these freight trains running to the extent that they are? And so my question to Anthony Brown's office was, when the government considering these kinds of plans, you know, where do our heritage assets fit into that? Because once you've destroyed them, a bit like the bats, they're gone. You can't get them back again. And then the second thing was, and this kind of came about as a side, when I was asking what the purpose of the rail line was, I was told at this point about it being commuter traffic. And when I pressed him, he said it was particularly for people that will work in the science park or the labs. And I asked him for some information on the numbers of people that commute from Oxford to work in the labs, and there was no answer to that. And secondary to that, I asked him, well, you know, given the situation that we find ourselves in this year with COVID, and people are not commuting in the same way that they did before. So I have very young children and I'm out on the road for the school traffic, and it's the school run, and the traffic is just non-existent anymore, which is wonderful. And this was kind of linked to, I asked about, in asking about the business case, he said that the Treasury were concerned about the amount of money that would need to be spent to, if the route followed the main roads, they were concerned about bridges and tunnels and the cost of that. But if the Treasury wanted to save some money, then surely there's a call to go back to the drawing board with the whole thing, because if the business case is commuter traffic, then, you know, it's just not proven. It seems complete nonsense to me. You know, in the state that this country's in right now, they could save a lot of money, not just, you know, a few quid on some bridges and a tunnel.
I'm not sure if I'm on mute or not, but could I just jump in on that one? So in terms of saving money, obviously agree with you. I mean, one of the things I did was to divide 5.6 billion by the number of households between Bedford and Cambridge, just to kind of bring it down to kind of a per household sort of level. They work in 2010 money, but it was £7,500 per household in 2010 money. In 2019 money, we don't know what it's going to be for 2020 yet. That's £9,000 per household. So in general taxation, every household is going to be paying £9,000 for this central section. You know, I don't know whether that's high on your priorities, but it's not high enough on mine. I think, David, you did have some figures in terms of the number of people that might be commuting. Was it 18,000 a year, David?
Oh, I don't have those to my fingertips, no.
No.
It wasn't very many at all. That was based on guesswork, but I really don't believe there'll be sufficient demand between Oxford and Cambridge, or between Milton Keynes, say, and Cambridge, to justify spending several billion pounds on a railway.
On Anthony
Local
Brown,
commuter routes, such as the metro and busway, well, maybe busways, yeah, there is an argument for those. But intercity travel between the cities we're talking about, I really don't think there is from the commuter sense.
No, I can't really.
just one comment on Anthony Brown, Ellie, was that I wrote to him over the weekend because he, I think he hasn't got the point about the consortium, the East West Rail consortium driving freight. He's been talking to East West Rail company, and they said, oh, we don't know anything about freight. So we had a reply from him to somebody else saying, oh, I don't know about all this freight. I think Cambridge approaches are overblowing it. So I think he's just I think he's catching up on what's happening potentially on that, just so you're aware.
Okay.
And so in terms of, does that answer your point about the demand for the railway? I take your point about COVID, and yeah, we ought to have reconsider the whole idea of whether it's going to be necessary. But in truth, we won't find that out for several years, whether COVID has had a permanent impact on people going to work, the number of people going to work compared to
yeah, I take your point.
before.
I think I'm possibly just venting my frustration that I think that
No, I agree.
priorities are absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
But you know, from the listed building perspective, is there anything? Because I'm not the only one that's in this position. Is there anything else that we can be doing? I couldn't get an answer from his office, so I'm not sure, you know, what government policy is.
I live in a listed building as well, and I don't know what the exact government policy is, apart from try to avoid listed buildings where possible. And I think from what East West Rail are saying, that's their policy as well. If the route is near our buildings, I think it's advisable to get, I mean, if East West Rail themselves don't offer a precondition survey, I think it's worth getting a precondition survey carried out on your property so you can see what it's like before the railway comes nearby.
Yeah.
And any deterioration from that after the railway's been operating for a while, you can tell East West Rail that, you know, that is an impact from their route. You'd obviously need to get a qualified engineer to carry that out, and if there are cracks, to check that they are from the railway. But yeah, that's all I can say, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate everything that you've done, because it quite, you know, somebody mentioned it earlier that the awareness was just so low, and the work that you've both done, I dread to think what position we'd be in. So I just wanted to say it's much appreciated. Everything, it's a huge amount of work, and you know, I for one am hugely grateful for that.
Pleasure. Ian Simpson.
Yeah, sorry. Ian and I are both on this together. So it's Pauline Simpson. Again, yeah, just want to say what a brilliant job you're doing, and I really appreciate it. I just want to come back to Stephen's point and say, you mentioned at the start something about a northern group who'd been doing some work. And I wondered if maybe you'd considered sort of getting together with them, since they seem to want the same as us, Route 6. That's basically it.
Okay. Yeah, so the group I think you're referring to is Campbell Railroad, who started several years ago, and promoted a route into North Cambridge Station. So our Route 6 is slightly different, or is considerably different to theirs. Mm-hmm. North of Cambourne, it's similar for a few miles. Ours then goes down to come into Cambridge from the south. We, as a group, Cambridge Approaches, support a northerly approach into Cambridge. So we do support Campbell Railroad's approach, which is to go through a North Cambourne station and Northstowe, and then into North Cambridge Station. Yeah. So we support a general approach into Cambridge from a different direction from the southerly one. But
do you think there's some sort of common ground that you might be able to sort of, because obviously the more people that work together, the more of a voice we're going to have?
But we do have regular meetings with them
Great.
to discuss tactics. They are a very small group now. But they've got very good ideas, very good engineers. So we'll continue our discussions with them and yeah, see where it gets us.
Okay, great, thanks.
The next one is Sean. Is there a Sean? Oh, yes. Hello. I think you're on mute. I'll unmute you. Try to. No, I think you've got to, William. If you could unmute Sean. I think William's muted as well. Sean, could you oh, there we are. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Thanks, guys. Your medals are in the post. King Canute sat down by the sea, up pushed the tide, and away went he. That is an old, entertaining ditty from school. Its relevance to what we've got at the moment is global warming and tidal surges, flash floods, and suitable planning considerations for large swathes of countryside that have water speeding from one place to another, and rather than being contained locally by trees, forests, and soil, and so forth. There is a famous lack of planning with regard to flooding and so forth, and the Environmental Agency does a great job, but is fighting against an increasingly problematic environment. So, is part of joined up thinking is flooding being bearing in mind how flat lands are something that is a showstopper potentially if we're not careful.
Yes, yeah, we fully take your point. We've in development of the options of the alternatives in option E, we've looked at flood levels, but you know, it is a floodplain in the area of option E, that they can't avoid floodplains. So that's another reason why we think that option E is a no-go zone.
So they've set up a sinking fund to sort this out, have they?
Sorry, say this again?
They set up a sinking fund to sort this out.
Yeah, I don't know whether you'd like to say anything about that, William?
Sinking
in terms of farmland and
yeah, well, we did speak to the campaign security of Rural England, Alan James, I think it was, and so he was talking about how by 2100 probably the fens will be flooded, and because the sea levels are going to go up by so much because of global warming. And so that's kind of fact one. Fact two was that 50% of the wheat production in the UK is within 50 miles of where we are. Next fact was that the best farmland we have in the country is in the fens in terms of quality. So if we lose all that great wheat growing farmland in the fens because of it flooding, then the land that we have left, so there's the slightly higher ground that we have south of Cambridge, becomes very precious. So putting a railway line through it, you don't lose that much because of the railway line, but it chops up the fields, which means that large machinery can't efficiently farm it in the sort of small bits that are left over. And the other point that was made was that because the farmers can't get onto the railway line to get rid of the vermin, then they can get up to 80% crop loss because of the vermin getting into the crops beside the railway. So it's a plea from the farmers not to mess with the farmland if there's a better option, and there is a better option, and that is a multimodal corridor along the A428. So they should do that. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Okay, next one is Lee Carter.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes.
Yes, sorry, I don't have a video on this device, so I'm not hiding. Just wanted to say, like everybody else, fantastic presentation, thank you. What is the opinion of big hitters like Trumpington Estate? Do you know, and can that come into the discussion?
Yes, well, I don't know the overall opinion of Trumpington Estates, but I know the opinion on their farmland, that they want to move it away, that they would support a route that goes nowhere near them, but and they would be open to contributing to judicial review if we had a strong case, but it would be reviewed on that basis.
So presumably they might not like Route 6.
They would accept a Route 6 which was modified slightly to not go near their farm, and that could be done. It's not by not going near their farm. I mean a fairly local tweak to the alignment, so it doesn't totally get rid of Route 6. No.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Okay. John Hobbs.
Yeah, I'd just like to offer kind of help to get a social media campaign going on this, because I think we should utilise that as much as possible. Use that to connect people across the parishes who hopefully can present, or we can use that to articulate some of the inconvenient truths and flaws in their approach to date, and also present credible alternatives, and also, you know, then post those on EWR's Twitter account, MPs and media Twitter accounts, to kind of just raise visibility on this across the board. Because I think maybe to what you guys have done, we've got the people in the parishes kind of more aware of this, and I think a lot of people were blissfully unaware of it for a long time. So great work in getting that kind of awareness raised, but I think we need to then crank it up a level really, and really use social media for that. So I think it's something I'm happy to help with.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that would be great. I mean, we have been on social media. We've been on real media as well. William has been on the local Cambridge radio, and there's been article in Cambridge News. So yeah, but any help in terms of getting a higher profile on social media would be very welcome. What do you think, William?
Absolutely, yeah. Just let's get in touch afterwards, John.
Yep, great. Okay.
Next one is John Abraham.
Yeah, well done, David. Thank you, William and David. Interesting presentation. I thought I'd just like to make a few comments about the fact that we don't want to get too hung up in rather localized issues here, to look at the big picture. Firstly, the reason why this will be a freight route is nothing to do with us, it's to do with London. It's to do with the fact that the Mayor of London wants to ban through freight traffic, and this is the only alternative to take freight from Felixstowe to the west of London. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't think it's a goer at all for this to go into Cambridge North. And the reason for that is it's not to do with commuters between Cambridge and Oxford, it's to do with people long distance travel between places such as Norwich and Oxford, and Norwich and the West Country. And one of the desires of this is to put in long routes. Now, if you go into Cambridge North, you then have to turn round and come out again. And the reason for doing it into Cambridge South and then northwards from there is so that you have a continuous route. So I think this needs to be the art of what is likely to happen. So Route 6 which I think is a really good idea. Everyone here, I think, believes it's a really good idea, not because it isn't going to be near us, but because there's a great logic to taking it along the motorway and dual carriageway corridors. So I think if we want to have a combined voice as to which way we go, that seems to be the way forward. And I don't think that anything going into north of Cambridge would even be considered at all, and we would just be ignored.
Could you explain your argument in a bit more detail about the approach to Cambridge North?
Yeah, if you were running a train from Bedford, from the Bedford direction, and you were going into Cambridge North, to go out again to Norwich, you would have to turn round. And the idea is that this will be a through route. So that's why it would approach from Cambridge South, then Cambridge Station, then Cambridge North, and out towards Ely direction, or whichever direction it's going to. That's the reason why they won't ever consider an approach from Cambridge North.
Right. One alternative to that is that passengers wishing to go from, let's just call it the west, to Norwich would go to Cambridge on East West Rail and potentially change platform rather, to a train that goes up to Norwich.
Yes, but this has always been, the idea of this has always been that it's a long distance route, and that's why they've planned it to go in from Cambridge South, and that's why it's been done that way. So I think unless you know other than I do, and this has been planned now for several years, it's always been a route that comes in from Cambridge South.
It has been, but there's been no compelling argument, and I personally haven't heard that argument that you've just raised for passengers wishing to go further into East Anglia as a reason for rejecting Cambridge.
Yeah, that is it.
But I'm not sure that there's. Do you believe there's evidence to support that in terms of passenger numbers?
Oh, right. I have no idea about that.
Surprised that there would be enough passengers to support such a.
And of course, well, the other thing is, of course, it then avoids an interchange in London, and that's the other reason for doing it. This is the reason for this line,
right,
to avoid London for freight and for passengers.
Yeah, I accept the point about freight and providing resilience to the freight system to rely on the North London line.
Yeah.
Or some.
But as I said, the Mayor of London, when the present Mayor of London came in, one of the first things he announced was that he was going to ban through traffic in London for freight.
Right.
This is why it is being built. This is why this line is there, because there is no alternative. So I think the idea that this is going to cost a lot of money to do this little bit in the middle is slightly misleading, because this is part of a bigger picture, and we have to understand that.
No, I fully accept your point about freight and building in resilience, and that goes totally counter to what East West Rail are telling us about it being a commuter route. But I fully accept your point about freight, and but in terms of passenger numbers going to East Anglia, rather than getting off the train and crossing the platform to another train, I personally find it hard to believe, to be honest. But so a passenger could go to Cambridge Central, cross the platform, and onto a train to Norwich. That's where they wanted to go, and to other places in East Anglia, obviously. Right, I think, does anyone else have any questions? So I can't see any more hands up. No, well, it is 8:30.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, everyone. Would you like to say any words before we?
Yeah, no, thanks very much. It's super to have such a large audience for this. We have arranged to record this, so we will certainly put the core presentation piece up on YouTube like we did for the last round of webinars. I should say that we've also arranged a couple more webinars for other villages, but if people here would like to join again, or maybe they joined late and missed some of it, then you're very welcome to come to those. So they are on the 2nd and the 3rd of December. So there's a post on the website for that. But yeah, no, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.